What is the best trilogy of all time? Maybe you value world building in trilogies. Maybe you value character arcs and how they develop across all three films. Maybe you like having a consistent tone in each movie in a trilogy. And everyone prefers different things in trilogies, but so this is definitely not an objective list. It's my favorites, but what I think are objectively the best ones, but they're still in my opinion, if that makes sense. There are a few trilogies that I haven't watched. I'll provide them on the screen over here, but I won't be talking about them in this video, but if I ever watch them, I will like to make a review on them. So a big question with trilogies is, do all three movies have to be great in order to be a great trilogy? I think to be the best trilogy, yes, all three movies need to be good. However, you can still be a great trilogy with only two of them being good. So an example of that, in my opinion, is Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. I think most people agree that the third one is not as good as the first two. I'm definitely one of those people. I do not like the third one. But I still see it as a good trilogy, as one of the better superhero trilogies we have out there, because the first two are just so good. The tone is pretty consistent across all three films. You know, they're pretty goofy, they're a little bit campy, but that's what adds to the charm of the trilogy, and all three films feel like that. I personally don't like it when a trilogy feels very separate to what it used to be. So if the first movie is maybe like a comedy / action movie, and then by the third one it's like a horror movie kind of, it can work well, and if it works well, it's very hard to pull off. But I like trilogies that kind of stay consistent the whole time, which is what Spider-Man trilogy does. How it's not just goofy and campy, it can hit hard when it wants to, because the characters are pretty well developed. I think Peter Parker is a good character. I've always said that Tobey Maguire is the best Peter Parker, and that Tom Holland's the best Spider-Man. To be honest, the villains are not very good. Maybe Dr. Octopus a little bit, but let's just say that the villains are not the main reason why this trilogy is good. The reason why this trilogy is good is the characters. I think the characters are well written and they're pretty likable. You know, like Harry Osborn, I think most people like him until the third movie, but that's what I mean by the importance of the third movie, is because yes, I look back at it fondly, but the third movie just drags it down a little bit. So yeah, continuing to another superhero trilogy. There have been loads of trilogies over the years, especially MCU, they have made quite a few, but their best trilogy, in my opinion, is definitely Captain America. So this is interesting because it actually starts off like okay, and then it gets better with each movie. So which is pretty uncommon. Normally it gradually falls down. So the first Avenger is pretty good. I quite like it, but the follow-ups are definitely way better. Steve Rogers is an excellent character, in my opinion, and probably the best character in the MCU. He, especially in that first movie, it really is about Steve Rogers. It's about him adapting to his new role, adapting to his new self, his new body. He has to become a leader. He needs to realize, like, oh shit, I'm good looking now. It's pretty funny because he's got this new body and he's really attractive all of a sudden, but he doesn't really realize it yet. So he kind of has to adapt to it. So it's pretty heartwarming and pretty funny. As the movies progress, he goes from learning himself to now adapting to a new environment in the second movie. You know, he has to adapt to an entirely new time difference, like 70 years in the future. Like that's hard, and they did that pretty well. And then in the third movie, he already learned how to become a leader, but more of a leader than in the previous two movies. So yeah, he really learns and goes through character arcs across three different films, but there's still a big character arc across all three films, like one big one. And I like that about this trilogy. I think the action gets better with each film, which is definitely an up. You want each film to be like have more tension than the last. So in the first film, there's a lot of action, but it doesn't always feel warranted. Like sometimes they just throw an action scene in there just because it's a Marvel film. Whereas in the second one, the script feels a bit more tight. Like when there's an action scene, there's a reason why it's happening, and the same is true for the third film. I always switch which I think is better, Winter Soldier or Civil War. I think they're both equally as good. Something else I should mention is that I am so glad that you don't have to watch other Marvel movies in order to watch this trilogy. Marvel has done that before, where you won't get the third film in Trilogy because you have to watch another Marvel movie in order to know in order to understand what's happening. You can just watch all three movies in a row, and still kind of know what's going on. Like maybe you're a little bit confused as to why Iron Man and Captain America don't like each other, but other than that, like you can kind of watch all three films like in an order. So yeah. Now before we talk about the best superhero trilogy, I want to give an honorable mention to Spider-Man to the Spider-Verse. If the third film is as good or better than the first two, it'll probably take the best superhero trilogy. Particularly the first one's amazing. Most people agree with that. The second one will also be amazing if this next one coming up is as good. At least in my opinion, because the ending of the second one, like I don't have a definitive opinion on that movie yet, because I just need to know what happens in that next movie. So, yeah. So, the best superhero trilogy, and it is actually my personal favorite trilogy, is The Dark Knight. It starts off very strong with Batman Begins. It really establishes Bruce Wayne very, very well. Bruce Wayne's definitely the best in Batman Begins than in the next two. He has to find himself, you know, like his backstory, like they cover that very well. And then what they do even better is how he becomes Batman. The first half of the film doesn't really feel like a Batman story. It feels like a Bruce Wayne story, which is very important when you kick off trilogies that you need to establish. Something that started off with this film is a message, which is, you know,
I failed. Why do we fall, sir? So that we can learn to pick ourselves up.
But that message there is present across all three films, and I really think that's important for a trilogy to do. You know, it helps audiences remember the trilogy more because they're thinking of a message of like, oh yeah, that was in this movie and in the next two. I really like that trilogy because it taught me this message. Like, if you do something consistent like that in a trilogy, I think that's very impressive. It's not necessary, but it definitely helps with audiences remembering a trilogy. Now, moving on to The Dark Knight, it's actually my second favorite movie ever. I love The Dark Knight, and that's why it's probably why I don't consider it one of the best trilogies, because all three movies should be similar in quality. However, I'd say 70% of people agree that The Dark Knight is better than the other two. I think the best trilogy should have all three films being very similar quality. But aside from that, incredible movie. The best villain in history, in cinema history, in my opinion. In fact, it has two incredible villains. Two-Face is super underrated in that movie. Bruce Wayne actually takes a sidestep because of how impactful the Joker is. He is maybe not the protagonist, but he's the main focus of that movie. Something I really appreciate in trilogies, this is just a personal preference, but you don't have to watch Batman Begins in order to enjoy The Dark Knight. There's a few trilogies out there where you're like, what the hell is going on? If you haven't seen the previous movie, which is fair enough. That's not a gripe against trilogies. However, I do appreciate it when you don't have to watch a previous movie in order to get the Dark Knight. Something super important, in my opinion, is expanding the world building, the scope with each film. So in the first movie, you know, like Bruce Wayne he's in Gotham, and then he goes out to train in like some other country. I forgot what country it was, but like you can feel that there's a big world out there. And then in the second movie, they expand upon it because, you know, he's in Hong Kong now. The mafia is in like other parts of, it's not just Gotham, like they operate globally. So you really feel like there is a world out there. And then the next movie, The Dark Knight Rises, you know, like they really expanded everything. Like you really feel like there is a world out there. And I think that's important for a trilogy to do, is to expand upon that. And I think the Dark Knight trilogy does that pretty well. Not as good as other films, but definitely one of the better ones. It's not quite up there as the best trilogy of all time, is that it doesn't feel super fluent, in my opinion. And when I say that, I mean, if you watch a first movie and you go up to the second one, and like it feels natural, then like that's good. But in particular, Dark Knight, The Dark Knight Rises, there's an 8-year gap, a whole 8 years of zero Batman. Apparently there was no crime in those 8 years. I don't find that convincing. I think it's very important for a trilogy to feel fluent. Of course there's advantages to stories that have one big story, because then yes, it does feel fluent. But stories that are told separately but are within the same world, it's very important for it to feel fluid, and it doesn't feel super fluent in this trilogy, in my opinion. That covers my favorite trilogy. Moving on to another subcategory is animation trilogies. There was actually a pretty clear winner in this debate, because I didn't want to include Toy Story and Kung Fu Panda, because they both have a fourth movie. However, I don't want to talk about Madagascar being one of the best animation trilogies. So I'm going to include those two, and I haven't even seen the fourth film of either of those. So starting off with Toy Story. One of the first 3D animated movies. Something I really like about Toy Story trilogy is that everyone has a different favorite. You know, my personal favorite is 3. I have friends whose favorite is 2 or 1. Like they're all pretty equal in quality, and that's a sign of a great trilogy. So the tone is pretty consistent across all the 3 films, although it can change a little. It's like the third film, yes, the humor is the same, the tone is the same, but when it gets deeper, it's the deepest it's ever been. So when people watch it in release order, the third one felt more mature than the first one, so they kind of grew up with the trilogy, which I really appreciate. I think that's a good quality to have for a trilogy. It brings it more nostalgia and everything. Great characters in Woody and Buzz. I think they're both one of the better characters in this whole video, because across all 3 films, they have a character arc. They learn from themselves, they learn of each other, and especially Woody, actually. I think Woody is one of the best characters in any trilogy. He really learns more about himself. As I was saying with The Dark Knight as well, I do feel like the world expands a bit. You know, in the first movie, they mainly stay within their household. In the second one, they go to like outside the house, and the third one they're everywhere. So I really like that about the trilogy as well. It's just a very well crafted trilogy that's consistent, that is enjoyable. Yeah, very good. Moving on to another great trilogy is Kung Fu Panda. Having a consistent message across a trilogy is great. However, Kung Fu Panda has different messages across all 3 films, and that also works very well because all 3 of them are very effective. They convey it very well. Po is such a good character. He's funny, which adds to the entertainment, but he also learns to mature. He learns more about himself across all 3 films. Similar to like Captain America, there is a real character there. Like I'm talking about character a lot in this video, but like it's so important to have good characters in a trilogy because you're seeing them 3 times. In my opinion, this trilogy has the best catalog of villains out of any other trilogy. First, like literally all 3 films have an excellent villain. Even the third film, which isn't as good as the first 2, has an excellent villain. I always change my opinion on which one is the best one because all 3 of them are great. And similar to the Captain America trilogy, you don't have to watch the show in order to get what is happening. So very appreciate it. So another great animated trilogy. I wouldn't argue with anyone if that was their favorite, but definitely my favorite, and I'm definitely a bit biased here, is How to Train Your Dragon. A huge reason for that is the first film. I absolutely adore that first film. It is my 3rd favorite movie of all time. I think the characters are excellent. They're all very likable. Hiccup especially really is one of the best characters ever in my opinion. He really grows, and with each movie he ages as well. So similar to Toy Story, I felt like I aged with Hiccup, with the characters as the movies came along. Because the first movie came out in 2010, and the second one and the third one came in 2019. So there's a 9-year gap between the 3 films. So, and by the end of the third film, Hiccup is like a full-on adult now. So yeah, I really like that about that trilogy. But it's not just Hiccup evolving. All the characters evolve. Burke itself, the place, has completely changed. From the first movie to the end of the first movie, it's completely changed. But then at the same time, from the end of the first to the end of the third, once again, it's completely different. And I really like how a big event really carries on onto the next movie and so forth. So the second film is really good as well. It is probably the weakest, but that's just because of how good the first and third movie are. I really appreciate how big the world feels. Like in the second movie, they explore an entire different island. They explore, like past relatives that they didn't know they had. Like it really feels like a big world out there. And by the end of the third film, I'm still thinking like, damn, there's still so much more to explore. So that's another good sign of good world building. I love world building. Oh, and I really like this. In the first film, dragons are the villains, at least for the first part of it, And then, but then it's changed and circumstances changed. So now in the second and third film, it's actually humans who are the villain. And I really like when movies do that, is when they kind of switch who the villain is and provide a different perspective. So that's the end of the animation category. Now I'm going to talk about 2 more trilogies before we talk about the 2 best ones. This one is going to be Back to the Future. I think I will put this in a category of the most fun. You can tell anyone to watch Back to the Future, the first or second one, and they're going to have an absolute blast. The third one is definitely not as good as the first 2, but it's still a good trilogy overall, in my opinion. There's just so much fun. But even with that, you're still on the edge of your seat, because the film establishes very well what the consequences are. If you don't finish this within a certain time period, everything is gone. Everything's fucked up. So, please finish this. But you're having fun along the way. So it's a very well balanced between those 2 aspects across the first 2 films. The second one's actually my favorite out of the 3 films, which is probably unpopular because everyone loves the first one. The first one's really good as well, but I just really like the direction they took with the second film. I really like the concept of it. If you haven't seen the documentary for the first film, I really highly recommend it. It's very, very, very interesting. Everything kind of went to shit, but they still managed to make the movie. It's quite interesting. I'd recommend it. Now we're going to talk about a trilogy that almost deserves to be within the category of the best trilogies of all time. And that is Planet of the Apes. All 3 films are excellent. I wouldn't argue with anyone which one is their favorite. I think all 3 of them are amazing. Caesar is probably the best character in cinema history, actually, in my opinion. I think Caesar is an excellent character. He really grows. Do you see what I mean by how important characters are in trilogies? Because you're seeing the same guy 3 times in 3 separate movies. So you better like him, otherwise you're not going to enjoy the trilogies. Similar to How to Train Your Dragon, you start off thinking one species is the villain, which, monkeys, we don't want the fucking monkeys to take over the world. But then by the end of the third film, I am fully against the humans. Fuck them humans, man. I want the apes to win, and that's very, that's very hard to pull off. But they really did it, and they took it slowly as well. With each film, I was more gradually going towards the apes. So that's a really good aspect of this trilogy. I feel like I'm repeating myself because I keep saying that each trilogy needs good characters, they need good world building, they need good villains. But you need them to have a good trilogy, man. One of the reasons they're not part of the best trilogy of all time is, first of all, they're not as iconic as the first 2. I think Planet of the Apes, yes, people talk about that trilogy, but nowhere near as much as the next 2. I also just can't think of so many scenes that absolutely left me in shock. When you think back at a trilogy, for example, The Dark Knight, I can think of many scenes that are absolutely shocked me, whereas in this trilogy, it was just consistently good scenes, good movies, but nothing that left me amazed. It is very close. I wouldn't argue against you if you consider it the best trilogy of all time, but I think the next 2 are just a bit more iconic. So we have finally made it to this part of the video. We're going to talk about the 2 best trilogies of all time. So we're going to start off with probably the most iconic trilogy, Star Wars Episode 4 to 6. Now this is actually quite interesting because most people agree that the third one isn't as good as the first 2, but the first 2 are just so good, and the third one is still pretty good that like you just have to consider it an incredible trilogy. The special effects were ahead of its time, the world building was insane, everything about the first film just worked so well. This trilogy had such an impact on society. You know, like you see Lego, you see music, you see anything, and Star Wars is part of it. Like, that's how impactful this trilogy is. Everyone knows what Star Wars is. There are so many incredible twists across this trilogy that just make you want to keep watching. Like, holy shit, that just happened. Please tell me what happens next. And then at the end, by the end of the first of each film, you're like, I would love to see more. So no wonder it's such a big franchise right now. Can we just talk about how the first movie came out almost 50 years ago? It honestly doesn't feel that old. This movie still looks like very well made, so I'm surprised it's almost 50 years old. So but yeah, the first film, you know, as you see it the whole time, you feel like you're in an adventure. The characters are so lovable, and across all 3 films as well, especially Hans. Hans is definitely my favorite out of the first 3. It's funny, it has good action, there's romance in it, you know, obviously sci-fi. There's so many things that support this trilogy that makes it so most people will enjoy Star Wars. Darth Vader is a villain whose presence is felt throughout the entire trilogy. Now, the interesting thing is that he's at his best in the 3rd film, which is so important because that gives people a reason to watch the entire trilogy rather than watching the first 2. It definitely has the best world building of any trilogy. Even excluding the films that came afterwards, like the fact that lightsabers and Jedi and all of that were introduced in the first movie is bizarre to me. And yet, despite all of that, the story really stood out from all of that world building and all of these crazy ideas that George Lucas thought of. So really is a testament to how well written the characters are, the story is, and then it just expands upon that within the second movie. So it really is a super duper iconic trilogy. But moving on to what I believe is objectively the best trilogy of all time. Not my favorite, but I have to admit, like, it is better than the Dark Knight trilogy, it is better than the Star Wars trilogy, and I thoroughly enjoy watching it, and it is The Lord of the Rings. I actually didn't watch it until like last year. I have never seen Lord of the Rings up until then. And I was blown away. I was like, why haven't I seen this before? I did not know how fucking long the trilogy was. I was in like, yeah, let's give it a watch. And I was like, oh fuck. And at first I was dreading it. I was like, fuck, I do not want to spend, what is it, 9 or 10 hours of your time? But man, is it so worth it. The movie, it really is, it feels timeless. Like, it did not feel like 9 or 10 hours. It went by pretty quickly actually. All 3 films were excellent. Like I keep thinking the third one's the best, and then the next day I'm like, actually no, the first one is good. But then the second one's like, oh, but Gollum is so good. And like, all 3 films really are really well made. I love that trilogy. It probably is known to be the best trilogy of all time. So many people love it. I would have loved to watch, like, to be alive for it to come out of each year, because I also watched the documentary for this trilogy, and how much hype there was for each movie, and especially that third one winning so many Oscars. Like, that's how you know, like, that's a great trilogy right there. I wonder if there will ever be a trilogy like this ever again, because I would love to be alive for something like that. Like, yes, Marvel achieved the same hype, but definitely not the same quality. So yeah, I guess we'll see what happens. But yeah, something super interesting with this trilogy is that it's kind of one big story, just spread across 3 different films. And whereas most trilogies is like 3 separate stories, kind of. Like, yes, Star Wars, it's one war. You can tell that there's a time gap between each film, kind of. Whereas with Lord of the Rings, it goes straight back into it, and then straight back into it again. Like, it's very, very interesting, and I really like how they did it. like it just feels like it goes past in an instant because of how the pacing is just so good. The characters are lovable. The action's really good. Similar to Star Wars, the special effects were so ahead of its time. It looks incredible today. Like, there are movies that come out now that look worse than Lord of the Rings. It's so interesting how this trilogy collectively is one big story. Like, there is a huge introduction that takes, you know, like an hour and a bit maybe, and then the entire second movie is like the first and second plot point, and then there's a huge climax for the third movie. However, each movie still has its own introduction, first plot point, second plot point, and climax. Like, there are a few trilogies out there that don't have that. For example, Across the Spider-Verse, like, it ends like bluntly, and you're like, oh well, that didn't really feel satisfying because I need to know what happens in the next movie. However, in this trilogy, each movie ends in a satisfying way that still wants you, like, yes, I still want to watch more, but I got what I wanted from this movie, and I feel very satisfied. Whether it be world building, characters, fluidity, pacing, action, Lord of the Rings is in or around like the top 3 of each of those categories, which is why I think Lord of the Rings is the best. That doesn't stop it from being my favorite though. I still prefer the Dark Knight trilogy. I think that trilogy is a bit more rewatchable, and I just love the Batman, but I do acknowledge that Lord of the Rings is a better trilogy. This is actually my first upload in 2 months. I've been gone, you know, dealing with life. I feel better now, and I want to commit to this channel. I think, and when I say commit, I mean like upload a video once a week, every week. It really is a lot of fun, and I missed uploading for the past 2 months. So, you know, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go back to uploading. And when I say that, just once a week, you know, just so I don't overwhelm myself too much. You know, I have a job, I have uni, so I have other things to worry about. But I do really enjoy making videos like this. Like, and I'm upping my editing skills, which is good for the career path that I might do. So, you know, not that I'm gonna do editing, but I do want to get into the film industry. And if I do become an editor, then, you know, this is good practice. The next video is actually going to be about a show. This is a channel about film and movies, but I also want to expand more into shows and video games, particularly story games. Like, for example, a video that will come out is the best campaign. I definitely want to talk about that because that has a lot of film elements, a lot of story elements, and in a way, a story in a film is very similar to a story in a video game. So stuff like that. I just want to cover stuff like that in this channel. So yeah, stay tuned for next week's video, and I'll see you next time.